Farmers struggling. Let's talk about it.
Even though American farmers are struggling, I'm happy that our president sent Argentina $40 billion. I'm willing to go broke. Ha! Couldn't be prouder. What a time to be alive.
First, I want to give a disclaimer and say I'm not really into politics like that. I'm not really a big politics kind of person, I would say the only kinds of politics, well, let me rephrase that, only side of politics that I feel like I kind of, really pay attention to per se is the economic side of politics, meaning things that are going to affect the economy, what is going on in the economy, certain bills, certain things that's just going on. That's just going to, overall affect what's going to happen, short term, long term, the stock market, just a bunch of different things, right? Even like, for example, when tariffs were passed, right? The stock market was going up and down, had a lot of volatility, right? Just a bunch of different things like that. So those are the things that I pay attention to as far as, politics goes and, what I really, embrace for real. All right. Also, it was kind of funny because that, I don't know if anyone else knows, but, we are, in the process of, sending Argentina. I think we've already sent them $20 billion, right? But in the process of sending another $20 billion, right? To help with their relief, you do a, exchange of, currency and stuff like that, right? To give them some relief, help them out and everything like that. However, the only issue that a lot of farmers are having right now is the fact that China, which is not buying any soybeans or anything like that from us right now, went from a $19 billion market all the way down to a $0 billion market, right? Those same, Chinese, manufacturers, whatever it is, right? People who are trading in China or companies that are trading in China for soybeans and stuff like that, they are going to Argentina and places like that, Brazil, X, Y, Z to get their soybeans. But we're now helping Argentina out, the same people that are literally trading with the same people that we're in the trade war with, right? So a lot of farmers are mad about that, right? And they're upset, like, aren't you supposed to be for the people, talking about Trump and, what he said and what he ran on and things like that? Like, aren't you supposed to be for the people? You said you were going to be for the American farmers, for America, all those good things, right? So a lot of them are, not feeling, I would guess the fruits of their labor if they voted that way and things like that, right? So I don't know. That's just some of the stuff that's going on in the news right now. Some of the things that, I've read, I've heard about and stuff like that. I've even seen some people's views and opinions on those kinds of things. I won't get into that, right? Because again, I'm not really too big into politics. I'm more so big on the economic sides of things, just things that are going to affect the economy overall, and things like that. So anyways, I feel like that's a, quick, good snapshot of, how some farmers are feeling, things like that. But let's get back to it.
I've been as worried as I am now about whether or not my kids and grandkids will be able to carry on.
He said, I love you, Mr. Trump. I need to see the fruit of your love.
5 of my customers have committed. That's how serious that this is.
And what it costs for us to farm is astronomical now.
I farm with paid-for equipment. All my tractors are 50 years old, and I can't hardly make this deal work. I think the tariffs are the ice cream on the cake of a perfect storm.
After a horrible year last year where most farmers in Arkansas Delta lost money, this year's going to be worse.
We made a decision to go out this year in the spring. So my son will not be the seventh generation on our farm.
We're going to lose 25 or 30% of the farmers in this country if they don't do something. It has to be done, and it's not just here. It's everywhere.
All right. Prime example right there, right? You see multiple people in that video talking about suicide, 25 to 30% of farmers going away, right? People not being able to continue on the legacy, right? 7th generation not going to be able to continue, So, I mean, it's just a bunch of different things going on right now, especially with the tariffs. And you even heard one farmer say last year wasn't a great year, right? This year is prone to be even worse. So when you culminate and mix all those things together, right? On top of, America not even having a great, I would say, agriculture, and farming, and trade business in my perspective compared to some of our, major big competitors and counterparts, right? Like, I feel like we do some things in trade, right? But we don't have nothing that I say we necessarily excel in, right? That we're just a head honcho in, right? It's not like we're the major, oil supplier, the major this supplier, the major that, right? Like we do our one-offs here and there, right? But we have specific niches, specific markets that we trade to. For example, we just talked about soybeans in China, right? That was our main market, right? They're doing 50 to 50+% of our soybean trade business, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, I could see a lot of farmers' frustration, right? Because they feel as if they're, getting weeded out and getting left out, right? Off of whatever, little, hope and little, market they had there, so they don't have very much room for comfort, right? They don't have a lot of flexibility, a lot of leeway, right? Especially when the markets have been what they have, for example, they're not doing good last year. And if they do even worse this year, then, hey, that's how you run out of business right there, right? So I don't have no major stance on it, I feel as if like Trump, he been talking about tariffs. This is something that's not a new ideology he's come up with just this campaign, before he, came president this term, right? All the different things that are going on right now, I feel like he's spoken about, right? He's been open and candid about, right? So for some of the farmers that feel some type of way, I don't want to be like, hey, hopefully you lose your business because this is what you voted for X, Y, and Z, right? But again, there always is two sides of the coin. He mentioned tariffs. He mentioned this. He mentioned that, right? And you said, hey, yo, I'm going to go support this X, Y, and Z, right? And that's what you voted for, right? So who am I to sit here and now be like, oh man, this, that, and the third, and have so much sympathy and empathy for that, right? Now, I don't want anyone to, lose their business, right? Especially if they've been doing it for generations on end, right? That's not what I'm advocating for, right? But I'm advocating for you kind of reap what you sow, right? If this is what you voted for, and it's not like he hid it again. It's not like he hid some of these things. He said, this is what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to place tariffs on this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that, right? And he's doing those things. Now that they're coming to fruition, just because maybe you didn't understand them, or maybe you didn't take them all the way serious, or maybe you thought it was just empty, dreams and hopes, whatever it is, the case scenario may be that you thought, it's here, right? So now you should have been preparing, adjusting, and those kinds of things, right? Because me personally, I knew if he got in office, these things were going to come to fruition, right? So I'm not really surprised by some of these things. I'm not surprised we're in a trade war. I'm not surprised we have this thing going on. I'm not surprised there's a government shutdown. There was a government shutdown last time he was in office, right? So I'm just someone, who just pays attention to what's going on in the news, right? So that's just me, and that's my perspective, But again, if you're a farmer out there, man, if you want to, make sure your business stays afloat, right? Just continue to make sure you pay attention, stay on top of things and stuff like that, right? And for the people who are non-farmers who got an opinion on farmers and stuff like that, just always think about what if it was you, right? And if you're thinking about starting something, again, just keep all these things in mind. But let's get back to it.
I wanted to start off by saying I did vote for Donald Trump. We are possibly going to lose our farm if NRCS doesn't hold up their contract with us on the EQIP program. So the reason that they're not able to hold up the contract is our EQIP program, which is cost sharing on fences, waters, a well, and some seedings, was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. Because of the executive orders, there's a pause or a freeze on the funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're not able to pay out on the stuff that we completed or anything going forward. I'm not the only one this is affecting. So there are other farmers in the comments saying that they're in the same boat that I'm in because they signed these contracts, and the contracts, even like, so whenever I looked into the contract, I made sure that that funding was set aside. It wasn't funding that, oh, we hope it's there whenever it's done. I made sure that that funding was set aside, so that way before I made these business decisions, I knew that funding was there per contract. So they're backing out on the contract because they don't have the funding. They can't release the funds.
All right. So this is kind of going down a different, kind of segue. This has nothing to do with tariffs, trades, or anything like that. This is an NRCS EQIP program, right? I guess there was supposed to be a contract, there was supposed to be a certain amount of funds that was, I guess, supposed to help farmers and things like that, right? And farmers were going to benefit, and it was going to help them in some way, some form or fashion. Me personally, I don't know too much about that program. I'm not a farmer. I don't have too many close relationships and close ties with people who have just big farms or anything like that, right? But what I will say is that when you are a farmer or you are anyone in business in general, right, and you're forecasting for something and you think, okay, I've signed this thing, I've made this business decision, you know, I'm banking on this, right? You always want to also have a backup plan. You also want to have angle where you could take to where if this falls through, okay, I could pivot and go this way, right? You know, because the cost of business is making sure you're being prepared, you know, and if you're not, then, you know, a lot of bad things can happen, right? Especially depending on the business, how much reserves you have, how much flexibility, you know, just a bunch of culmination of things, right? So I get it. I really do get it, right? A lot of farmers are banking on this thing, that thing, NRCS, the EQIP program, all that, right? However, again, I'm reiterating, you know, these aren't new ideologies. These are things that I feel like, you know, he ran on. You know, he said the guy in the video said he voted for Trump, right? These aren't things Trump hid. You know, he said he was going to do this. He said he was going to have this program. He said he was going to do this thing, right? Look at Project 2025, right? All these different things. Like, people, even he could say whatever he want to say, right? He could say, oh, that's not what I believed in. You know, yeah, I don't know about that. XYZ, all those good things, right? But the proof was in the pudding, right? All these things were like right in the middle of the news, you know, they were being announced, you know, just because you want to be oblivious to it, you know, you want to have this big dream, XYZ, like, hey, it is what it is. Also, just another point, this is kind of, you know, going off track a little bit, right? But one thing I never really got was, you know, and again, I have nothing against, you know, no political party or anything like that, right? But in the sense of like economics, right? Trump's first term really didn't have no eye-popping, you know, economic, you know, numbers or no economic, you know, transgressions or, you know, transitions to bigger, you know, things. Like, it wasn't really anything, you know. It was nothing special. It was just really kind of, you know, regular, if anything, right? There was nothing, you know, too much change. So in my mind, especially when it comes to farmers and regular people and stuff like that, like, if there wasn't anything major, in my opinion, like there was no major lifestyle changes, what makes you think a government who's never really bailed out its people, per se, as far as like the average American, you know, never really done that, you know, never really changed lives, you know, things like that. What makes you think it's about to start with this president, you know? Like, yeah, farmers and stuff like that and businesses have always kind of been bailed out, you know, by the government a lot and at times like that. But for just the everyday person, like, what made you think your whole financial situation was about to change, right? Your financial situation and how you going about life and things like that starts with your discipline, your daily habits, you know. What are you doing, you know, set yourself up, you know, as far as saving and things like that. Like, that doesn't come from the government bailing you out. Like, the government really doesn't have any money. The government's money is us paying taxes. And if they continue to tax us to death, then they'll kind of get somewhat more money, but even then they overspend and all those good things, right? But that's a different topic for another day, right? But I just never, you know, got all the, you know, hype and the, you know, just the hype train that everybody was on to be like, oh, this economy is about to be X, Y, Z. I'm like, huh? You know, like that was just my mindset, right? That's just kind of me thinking through things logically and stuff like that, right? But anyways, I digress. If you liked the video and you stuck with me this long, man, I appreciate it. Go ahead and smash that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe as well, as it's only going to help build this channel, man. I want to build a channel here where we can, you know, talk back and forth. You know, you talk about, you know, whatever you want to talk about in the comment section, you know, maybe I'll reply, maybe I won't, but I just want everybody, you know, come and give their opinion, right? And then also I have good conversation that y'all like to hear. So with that being said, don't forget to drop a comment below as well if there's anything that you want me to talk about, or if there's anything in this video that I've said that you want to comment about. But until next time, and I'm out.